back to the Irish Mags Show, your weekly Newcastle United podcast brought to you by the Irish Mags NUFC Supporters Group. My name is Paul, I'll be your host for today. And joining me this week, it's our Irish Mags Chief Community Correspondent, Mr. Alan Williamson. Say hello, Alan.
How's it going, lads? How are we?
We have our Honorary Lord Mayor of the Irish Mags, Mr. Tevin Fareed. Say hello, Tev.
What's the story, lads? How are you?
How are you, Tev? Good to have you on. And of course, I'm delighted to welcome our very special guest this week. Making his Irish Mags debut, he's the face, the voice, and the poster boy of the excellent True Faith podcast. I don't know if you wrote that yourself. Mr. Alex Hurst, welcome into the Irish Mags Show. Great to have you here.
Cheers, Paul. Happy to be here.
Delighted to have you here. Normally we have another guy that hangs out here. His name is Krisho, and I'm sure our listeners will be happy as us that we have a break from him this week with all of his bad takes that he brought us last week, which extended as far as Scotland winning the Euros. And at that point, we've decided to give him a week's break to think about what he's saying.
Yeah, he's on a ban.
Has to be done. Right. Well, on this week's show, we'll be very much interrogating Alex on all of his Newcastle United history and, of course, all things True Faith related. We'll be chatting about some of the recent news that's been emerging from St. James's Park, including updates on MAG's membership, the release of our 2024-25 fixture list, as well as checking in on how some of our lads are getting on at the Euros, actually, now that the first round of games is complete. Then, for our spotlight, we're going to be picking Alex's brain on a number of key focus areas for Newcastle United. We know he likes to usually keep his opinions very reserved and very subtle and low-key, but as we gear up for a new season, we thought we'd try and bring some of his deep, dark secrets out of him, particularly focusing on four key categories, which is looking at management and tactics, organisational and commercial structure, fan experience, and, of course, the big one, playing squad and transfers. Don't forget that this show is available to watch on YouTube, as well as listen on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as usual, be sure to like and subscribe, follow the show, drop us a comment, drop us a rating, whatever you could do. It's all very much appreciated. I think we need to move straight over to you, Alex. And thanks again for joining us this week. Delighted to have you here. I think most of our listeners definitely would be fans, listeners, if not patrons of True Faith, no more than ourselves. But just in case, Alex, in case any of our Irish Mags listeners and beyond don't know who you are, and of course the origins of True Faith, maybe could you tell us about where it all started for you? I suppose there's no need for me to ask how did you become a Newcastle fan when you're obviously born and bred, but maybe thinking about your earliest memories, first games and the like, and then obviously how it's all evolved towards where you are now with True Faith and everything that goes with it.
Happy to. First game, I think, was Newcastle 1 QPR 2 season. I think it was like November '94. I've no memory of it. I've just been told I was there. The first game I can remember was Newcastle 5, Nottingham Forest 0, last day of the 96-97 season. So on that day, you had Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, Sunderland and Middlesbrough both relegated. And it's all been downhill from there. Sadly for me, it didn't stay that way that summer. And Kenny Dalglish and the rest is history type thing. But that's where it started. And then we've actually been doing a bit of reminiscing with my friends recently about, because you touched on earlier in your intro, Paul, about memberships and things like that. And when I was at school, during Bobby Robson's time and Graham Souness's time, and the demand for tickets was similar to what it is now before Mike Ashley came and kind of ruined everything. But you just used to have to get in the queue at like 7:30 in the morning for a big game. The box office opened at 10. And back then, whether it's being a kid, whether it's a different time, it's a bit like the Adidas kit launch, really, where people are just willing to do it. There was none of this memberships or online accounts. It was just, probably younger listeners are thinking, why we're talking about this? But it was just a different way of doing things. Just like if you really wanted to go to a game, obviously harder if you're an Irish fan, getting across the box office for 7:30 a.m. But if you were locally based and you could skip school, that's what you used to have to do to get in. And they used to put basically all the child tickets were up in level 7 next to the away fans, so it was kind of halcyon days. Newcastle good, crucially. Everyone's youthful football memories are important to them. It helps when you're winning, beating good teams. So yeah, Newcastle United mad started going away from home when I was about 15. Again, much less kind of organised, and tickets were easier to come by. all that kind of stuff. So he was able to get to basically spend every penny he had to work 2 jobs when I was at school just to follow Newcastle home and away. But at this point, they'd turned into a terrible side, and the Graham Souness kind of rallied briefly under Glenn Roeder for half a season, and then all downhill from there, sadly. But I think my first year of university, I did every single Newcastle game home and away the year we got relegated. So maybe I need to go less. That's the story. And kind of come out of university, True Faith is a fanzine's been going since 1999. And then, so I wrote for that. I was an avid reader, and I started writing, became friends with the editor at the time, Michael Martin. He's someone you should definitely get on your show because he's from Irish heritage and loves all things Republic and Northern Ireland. So he's a big influence on my life, my football supporting life. Learned a lot from him. And then there was a True Faith podcast before us, which Taylor Payne and Stephen Best did. That became kind of infrequent because I think they had things going on in their lives. Maybe if you have them on one day, they'll tell you outside of football, which do pop up time to time, family, jobs, all that kind of stuff. And we thought there was a space for a weekly podcast, and it's actually our 10-year anniversary this August when we first started. And a bit like speaking to you guys off air, it wasn't started with any focus or plan in mind. I was a big podcast listener at the time as I still am, I suppose, of kind of history. And I just didn't feel at the time there was like a regular Newcastle podcast for people who were attending games. No disrespect to anything else that was out there. It was just we felt there was a gap, and we started podcasting weekly and kind of grew from there. And we got quite lucky, I think, because there was no one else who was doing kind of a consistent post-game podcast after every single game. A lot of stuff at the time was every couple of weeks, every month. So we were lucky that we developed somewhat of a listenership. It just grew from there, and a real catalyst for us was Rafa Benitez joining the club. That kind of took us from, a couple of thousand people listening to more than that. And then everyone just kind of tried to stay in the game in the bad days of Steve Bruce and lockdown. Podcasting gave you a little bit of something to do, I suppose, in those difficult times. And then everything changes in October 2021, of course. And it's funny because I'll always remember this. I went to Wolves away last game before the takeover. There's a guy called Norman Riley I do the podcast with, and we were at Wolves together, and we stayed over, and we recorded the podcast in the morning after the night before the game, and it deleted. It didn't work. Always kind of really hot on my tech and making sure everything's okay. Not because back when we first started, it was an absolute car crash, and we lost it. And I was driving back. We ended up recording it again, and people still to this day come up to me at home games, what live events we do, and I promise you, lads, they'll say to me sometimes when I really want to know how bad things were, we go back and listen to that post Wolves podcast. And on the way home from that, I'm not just saying this because of the way things. On the way home from that, it was like, what am I doing with my life here? I'm following Steve Bruce's Newcastle. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't care. George Colkin had made the comparison that Bruce stood there, like literally said word for word from the year before, where we'd got a lucky last minute equaliser, and I was just like, I've got to stop putting so much time and effort into putting. I'm not saying I wasn't going to be a Newcastle fan anymore, but it consuming my life. I was like, I'm not getting out what I'm putting in. The takeover's not happening. We need to have a serious conversation at the end of the season, because we had patrons at the time, and there's a good few hundred people still paying us to do the content, which we're grateful for. But it was like, this is just not worth it. And then, that was the Saturday, and by the Thursday it was done, and none of us have looked back since, I suppose. And this community as a fan base is kind of a real sliding doors moment in our lives. So hope that answers all your questions, Paul.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, it's the way you brought us through there, both from a fan's perspective and obviously, being a podcaster, and like you said, traveling to, obviously a lot more games than we would get to go to naturally. Time, effort, energy, money, obviously, but that's reflective of probably all of our journeys as, lifelong or long-term Newcastle fans, right? There'll be a lot of younger listeners that maybe aren't aware of that roller coaster that was the ups and downs, coming back to the Premier League early 90s, staying there, doing incredibly well, obviously nearly even fucking winning it. and then the topsy-turvy nature of life since. Like that, you know, we all listen to the podcast, we hear different journalists and different, you know, like we said, broadcasters talking about the same thing. But even as a basic fan, we've all sat there in front of the TV and questioned it at some point. You know, I'm still like, you know, we've all traveled over, and even for ourselves, it's a big journey. It takes up a weekend. We book time off. You know, as much as Ryanair is cheap, usually they're often not that cheap because they know when there's games on and there's very limited flights, and there's always the 4 a.m. point in the airport, which in its own way is great, but obviously takes its toll. But it's very reflective of that roller coaster as a Newcastle fan. I've got a question here for you, Alex, which is, I mean, it's kind of double loaded question. One is a highlight as a Newcastle fan. The other would be a low light. Now, maybe you've already touched on the low light, but we'll go high, and maybe like if you were to pick out a particular highlight, assuming maybe the Wolves thing is the low light, which I can't wait to go back and listen to after this show. What would be the big highlight for you over those years, those tumultuous times?
Yeah, I suppose this one's fresh in the memory, so maybe I'm romanticising a little bit, and it's actually a game Newcastle deserved to be hammered in, really, and it's 0-0 at the San Siro this year, and it was being in the ground about half an hour before the game started, and I don't know if any of you lads were there. I know people were there, but one thing I felt that wasn't really kind of cut, like the fans who weren't there didn't pick up on as much, probably because the commentators or journalists didn't cover much, is just how humid it was. It wasn't the heat, it was the humidity.
Yeah,
that really impacted Newcastle's performance that night. But so Newcastle were very poor, but being in the ground half an hour before, and the San Siro, I think it was 65,000 there, so it wasn't quite full, but just being there for the spectacle, and it was like a real it's hit home moment of how far the club had come from that Wolves game in particular. And that was October 21. So we were in September 23, so not even 2 years. That was just an incredible, like, I needed to kind of sit down, not like they have real seats in the San Siro end, it's just kind of like slabs on the floor, but it was just like, wow, we've made it, and this is real European football heritage. I mean, I'm not a Milan fan now, but like, look out for Milan, because that's a proper football atmosphere, and it's a proper football club, and you can only get that kind of support, and support was incredible, absolutely incredible. You know, it takes generations of people to create what they've created, and that stadium's falling down. I can see why they want to build a new one, but I feel so privileged to have been there for a real important game. It's not as a tourist, which I've done before as football tourism, when you go and you take in a game, you don't support either side. To be there as a Newcastle fan with like 4,500 other Newcastle fans, and just witness that, and the teams coming out, and the tifo the Milan fans did, and the noise they made, that to me, you know, it's not up there in terms of results or performances or goals, but I just think being there, witnessing that, it was a real privilege to be there.
Can I ask you something on that? Did you cry when the Champions League music came on? Because I did. I was in the San Siro, and I don't care. I admit, I cried when that music came on.
He cries all the time.
Yeah, I know.
I think I was already crying because I'd lost like 100% of the fluids in my body from the climb up and the heat in the stadium. I queued up pre-game for a bottle of water, and the heat in that, like, joke, I wouldn't even call it a concourse they've got. Like, there's no way you get closed down in the UK and Ireland for that kind of stadium now. They wouldn't let people in it, and I'm pleased they do, but it's a proper throwback to, like, you know, the 80s and 70s and stuff of what stadium used to be like. But it's I didn't quite. I don't normally kind of. Well, we do a podcast behind our paywall where we kind of try and audio record the key moments in games, and we don't pull our phones out to do it. It's just kind of recording as the game goes on. And I almost just wanted to kind of turn the recording off. I didn't, because it just felt like such a special moment that I didn't really want to share it with anyone. It's very selfish of me, and probably not very fair on the patrons. We did do it, but I just felt like that moment, Alan, when the Champions League moment came on, and I don't know if you felt this, but it was such a big game for Milan. That's what I loved about it. They were all up for it. Like, over the years, we've gone to all these grounds, and it's really funny, by the way, that Man U do this now, which I might come back to, but we'd go to all these grounds and just get beaten with, like, we'll win the singing. You know, that's us. We'd win the singing. Like, we'd lose 3-0 at Old Trafford, and they'd knock it out of first gear, and we'd go to Anfield, even under, you know, Benitez when he was manager. I went a few times We'd lose like Jermaine Pennant goals and stuff like that. And like, we'd sing all game and everyone would kind of feel good about themselves. But actually, the reason that we won the singing is that they didn't care because we weren't a threat. And we would be up for it and they wouldn't be. And it was so good to be in all three. Well, I was at Dortmund, I wasn't in Paris, but all three of those games were massive games for each of those clubs, and Newcastle were the opposition. And I think that's important. You're not just there kind of fulfilling a fixture like we used to do. Like Milan were up for that game, their players were up for it, their fans were up for it. It was a big game for them, and I took a lot of satisfaction from that.
Yeah, I think that's true. A few of us were at Dortmund away as well, and you could feel it. Every single game that we had, we felt we could get a result. Like Dortmund away, we weren't there. Obviously, we're there for the crack, but we actually felt, look, if we're able to do this, X, Y, and Z, we're able to get a result. Now, obviously, on the day, if you were at Dortmund away, you could see it. Like, I felt sorry for Lewis Hall, got obviously peppered, but we are playing against big sides. A few seasons before, we were losing against Wolves away. I'm feeling very frustrated. So, again, that kind of leap when, as Alden was saying, in terms of Milan, felt the same in Dortmund away. We're actually at Dortmund. We're in Dortmund. We're playing Dortmund away, playing Milan. We're playing PSG. Like, this is not normal for Newcastle, but I think what Eddie's trying to do, we're trying to make this norm, making it the norm, So for the next few seasons, Europe is the minimum, So I think, obviously, the 90s and stuff like that, we've had Europe. But I think getting that feeling back, and obviously, Alan saying in terms of Champions League, that's just bringing back the good memories. But now we just probably need to make it consistent.
That's the thing, because our visits in the Champions League or our appearances have been limited, but other clubs who are always there, like the fans definitely would take it for granted, And I mean, maybe after 20 years of being in the Champions League every year, you can't blame them because it becomes a bit more normalized, but I find it hard to believe that we will ever have that mentality that we take it for granted or just have it feel normal, because it won't. It's like my lads, my other half, she's French. And I said to her, "Are you gonna, we're gonna watch France play Austria?" And she was like, "Oh, I might. I don't know." And like the vibe was like, "Oh, I'll probably just start watching when we get to the quarterfinal." And it's like, we'd love to be there. We'd love Ireland to be there. In fact, we'd pay if Ireland could be in the group stages, and they just take it for granted because they know it, So yeah, that's a wind up. But I don't feel like as a club or as a fan base we'd ever take that kind of thing for granted,
No, not at all.
Next year we won't be there, but we hope that next year is the first year of the beginning of a consistent run at the Champions League.
Yeah.
I suppose that we'll stick with that. Really, we don't have Europe next year, Alex. Like, I'm sure, particularly for yourselves who do a hell of a lot when it comes to the True Faith podcast and all the work that's done. Do you know what? Does that majorly change plans when you think about events you might have done, and obviously the traveling and the different types of content you can produce? Even all the way up to the last day or the FA Cup final, for example, when naturally Man Red decided to end all that. Like, how does that alter or amend things for next year for you guys?
Massively. It's a huge blow. I mean, it's a huge blow as a fan. And like Tev's just alluded to there, the club have a European budget, they have a European squad team in terms of first 11. They have a European wage bill, and they're now denied of the revenue and the exposure that Europe brings, even if it would have ended up being Conference League as it would have had they finished sixth like they should have. From a True Faith perspective, it's probably saved us a few quid in terms of the transport and last year with it being the Champions League, we really tried to get like as many of the wider True Faith. We saw 20 contributors in total who contribute regularly to the podcast, so we try to get everyone involved. Not everyone lives in Newcastle, so we kind of put on flights from all over the place. We didn't put on flights. We put them on flights. I'd love to be able to put on flights to make things a hell of a lot easier. But yeah, so we might save a little bit of money, but that we don't want to. We want to be covering those games. We want to be experiencing those games. We recorded podcasts in hotel rooms, and it's not very glamorous, but I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it. You're just away with your mates, like you guys were in Dortmund. You said you're just away with your mates, and being able to make stuff that a few thousand people are going to tune into is that I enjoy doing that. So we'll not be able to do that, and I probably would never go to somewhere like Dortmund if Newcastle weren't playing there. So the opportunity to visit new places, we've lost that as well. And I don't want to get into the manager or the tactics or the squad or the transfer budget or PSR too much now, but it was a failure not to get into Europe. Doesn't mean we need to sack the manager. Doesn't mean everyone has to be unhappy or not rate him or not rate the project, but we shouldn't be afraid to kind of call failure. Finishing, they should have finished 6th last season. They probably should have finished higher. But we I think most fans will give them a little bit of leeway because of all the shit they had to deal with along the way, and there was some significant shit to deal with along the way. But it was in our hands going into that last week of the season. And I got asked by 442 magazine today, what do Newcastle need to do differently next season, or what does Howard need to do differently? And they need to start taking their chances. You get to a cup final, you need to win it. You put yourself in a position where you're 4 points from the first 2 Champions League games, and you've got to then finish 3rd. Probably you get to a League Cup quarter final and you're 1-0 up against a terrible Chelsea side at the time. You've got to take those chances. Great getting there. It's great putting yourself in that position, but that's what separates the top managers and the top teams from the ones no one remembers. And that's, you take your chances when they're presented to you, not just for yourself, but to screw your opponents, to push your opponents into the dirt. And Man United should not have, and again, I get it because it's FA Cup stuff, and Newcastle couldn't impact that, but Newcastle should have won at Old Trafford. They should have played their best goalkeeper. They should have played the normal 4-3-3 formation before going 1-0 down, and they should have won the game. And if I don't know if any lads were there that night, but that game reminded me of the end of Steve Bruce's reign at Newcastle, where fans turned up to the ground and they're behind the team, but no one sung. There was no noise. It's not the loudest of stadiums anyway, but it was just different. All the Man U fans I spoke to pre-game, they just didn't want to play the fixture. They thought they were going to get humiliated. They thought they were going to get embarrassed, and we gave them the platform to have a great night against us. Eric Ten Hag gets on the microphone at the end. Does he do that if they're beaten 3-1 or 2-0? I don't think so. Then they go to Brighton and win, and they bounce into that cup final. And we gave them a lifeline, and that's what we've got to do next season, is be more ruthless in those situations, I think. But I've gone off on a tangent, Paul, but Europe's a killer as a fan and for true faith.
But it's all connected. Yeah, go on, Tiff.
Yeah, I think it's a big thing as well, ruthlessness. Like, I think a few weeks before, Burnley went to Old Trafford and drew 1-1, and really and truly Burnley should have won, So it wasn't like Manchester United were coming in with form, but again, Brighton at home, Everton at home, Manchester United away, Chelsea away. Like, how many points did we need to get 6th, So I know we were kind of looking at 1 or 2 games, but there was so many opportunities to be ruthless. I think the Everton at home game was so frustrating because we were all over them first half. But being all over a team doesn't bring goals, you have to stick in the back of the net, But that's the main thing. And I think we need to be ruthless, and we need to look at the players that we have. Obviously, not to go into the squad in depth, but like, how many of our players that we know are ruthless, that can go in. Obviously, the likes of Isak, great form. Gordon's doing good. But again, from our midfield, how many players do we have coming on the bench that are rootless? Like the West Ham game is actually a brilliant like to showcase in terms of Barnes, where we were losing 3-1. He comes on, scores 2, rootless, outside the box, rootless. If Miggy was in the same position, what happens? We don't need to say. So again, we need to look at the rootlessness in terms of players that we have.
I think that's probably the word of the day. There's the ruthlessness, and that'll probably come up a lot now when we start looking at next season. Because we need to control our own controllables more. We're squandering chances where it falls out of our control then as a result. So, Alex, sticking a little bit along the line of events and obviously the true faith in the podcasting. Like, one of the things I'm desperate to get over for, and it's just tricky for us because obviously we're traveling on weekends in between work, would be one of the live events that you guys have had, and you've had a couple of them obviously over the last year or so, and we've chatted about it here. And if, let's say they're on a Thursday, it's kind of tricky because our flights and work and all that. But I'm determined it's going to happen for sure. You did a couple of them last year. I'd love to hear a little bit about them, and in particular as well for our listeners, because I've listened back to all of them, and they're even though we can't attend, they're great to listen back to. And obviously the guests you've had on there are brilliant as well, and the insights as well as the fun and the enjoyment and the few points to go with it. But maybe if you could kind of give us a few of the highlights from the live shows you've had, let's say last season or over the last couple of seasons, and then what's ahead if you're allowed to divulge that information as well, Alex. Spoilers.
No problem. I don't mind telling you lads what's ahead first, because the next one booked in is the night before the season starts at Gosforth, just outside of Newcastle. So it's not on sale yet, but we're really looking to that. We're really hoping we didn't get drawn as the Friday night game. It was almost certain Man U or the Friday night game. I just knew. But if they put us on Friday night when we've got these places, you've got to book them months and months in advance. So we'd have been screwed because obviously we wouldn't have done it. So I'm really pleased that we're Saturday 3:00. Saturday 12:30 might have been an iffy one as well, with again, like you say, the amount of pints people drink at them. So, and that, like, I don't mind the venues love us, not because they think we're great, and we're lucky that we tend to sell all the tickets, but our crowd, which is not our crowd, it's a Newcastle United supporting crowd, they just drink the places dry. That they run out of beer. It's like it's great for the venues, and we keep getting offered better and better deals to host them because. And we keep getting different venues asking us, because I think it's just the whispers gone round about, like, if you get a True Faith or a Newcastle United crowd in, your bar receipts are going to be through the roof. And funnily enough, we the last one we did was Monday, because it was the day after the season finished against Brentford. So we do, to answer your question, we do a kind of journalist panel show, and we do them kind of twice a year at the Stand Comedy Club in Newcastle. Got a really good relationship with those guys. Great venue. If anyone listens ever in Newcastle and they just want like a good cheap night out, definitely recommend the Stand. Generally, really good bunch of people who work there, and we tend to have the same guys. We have Keith Downey, Craig Hope, George Colkin, Mark Douglas, Luke Edwards. I don't think I've forgotten anyone there, and they're great, and they're really, we kind of do them Christmas time, or the year before last we just did a pre-League Cup final, and that's just kind of a flavour of the season, how everyone's getting on, how their season's been. And part one's always like a live podcast with me, and then part two is always audience and patron questions. And then because the demand for the shows is so high, and we sell the tickets, we're lucky to do so like quite easily. We've started doing kind of just us podcasters, and we'll always get a guest on. So we did one with Mark Douglas. We have a partnership with Aspers Casino in Newcastle, which does they haven't paid me to say this, I promise. They do a really good match day deal. Anytime Newcastle are playing at home all day, any draft beers, £4, and the beers are good beers. £4 a really good price for a pint, really good these days. So yeah, we did one there with him, and then we did one with Luke Edwards at the Gosforth Theatre, and they're just a really good way for us to engage with our audience. We're really lucky that people want to come along, and it is just a piss up, really. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there's some master plan behind it. It's let's go on stage, talk about Newcastle, and then
why do you think
as
we
much
want to
as
come, Alex?
We're aligned. Very aligned.
Gang of Irish
Oh, yeah.
lads. Do
you have the link?
So it's great to it's always great to just mingle afterwards and chat about Newcastle with lots of people. And there's a few lads travel quite far for them, which again is very grateful to them. And we always try to now do as much for fans like yourselves. We try to align them with home games, like night before type thing, or the Thursday before. But we're trying to get in Fridays because people can travel. Like at the last one we did at Aspers, there was fans there who travelled over from Minnesota for the game the next day, and it meant they could come to an event like that, which the club do things as well, and that's great. And you can go into Shearers, but it's nice for them to be able to kind of just come to an event for Newcastle fans where they're going to be in the same room with, like, I mean, they're like you, they'll have their Minnesota supporters club back home, but it was really nice to have them there and just like kind of see them enjoy the drinks after and stuff like that. So yeah, next one's going to be on sale this week, I hope. Just lining up the journalist who could do it is now can't, so just lining up another one as the kind of journalist guest. But they're fun nights, and it's only like a ticket plus like small booking fee to the venue, and it'd be great if anyone is traveling over from Ireland. They're most welcome.
Leave you and me. There'll be plenty travelling over for
Yes,
that
there
opening
will.
weekend. Absolutely. Like Dublin Airport the morning of a game, you see all kinds of fans from all different clubs, but like especially now, particularly I suppose in the last couple of years, as we brought all the Irish mags together and we've got a lot of the gear going out there, you kind of can't go anywhere without spotting it. So trust me, you'll be seeing a few of these Irish mags tops, I would imagine, floating around at the Gosforth that night, potentially including a couple of us as well. Right, couple of quick fire questions for you, Alex, before we move on to All Matters Newcastle, and we have a couple of questions in from our Irish Mags group as well. Just off the top of the list, best interview or production you've ever done in terms of True Faith, or most enjoyable or memorable?
most memorable, I think, as I interviewed Gabriel Clark, the sports reporter for ITV, when they released the Bobby Robson documentary in 2018, I want to say. And that was, I thought that was going to be like a run-of-the-mill kind of, and I'd never met Gabriel, and I met him since. I'd obviously watched him kind of cover England, really, and that's where he knew Bobby Robson from. I mean, he still does it, I think, for ITV in the UK. The passion that guy had for that project and for Bobby Robson was just absolutely insane. Like, we did it in his hotel room, in that hotel looking over the stadium. I forget what it's called in town, but you probably know it, the one that Shark Bar's below it. And the rooms look out directly onto St James's, and that was like, I'd just be with me and the Salmon. That's it. The passion that he had and the passion he was able to demonstrate, Bobby Robson had for England and for Newcastle, that just stayed with me. That, you know, sometimes we think that these broadcasters or these people who like make a living within the game, it's, you know, it's all it's just for the money. Like, that was those were people who wanted to tell a story because they thought it had to be told, no other reason. And then I don't know if any of you guys or your listeners or viewers haven't seen it. I still think it's on Netflix. It's a must watch. It's a must watch. So that was great. And then I suppose last year was we had Peter Silverson on at the start of the season to kind of talk about the commercial direction of the club. And I'm just, you know, really grateful to him for giving up his time to speak to supporters, because fan engagement is something the club, you know, probably to a lot of fans, I think they don't get right. But there's a director of the club sat talking to fans, and not everyone will have liked his answers, but we're not really there when you do those interviews. You're not there to kind of glean things from people you like. And I'm not saying I disliked anything, but we just wanted to get his side of the story and his view on the commercial direction of the club. And that was, I mean, we don't really seek a relationship with the club because we're fan media, and it's hard to have a relationship with the club. I don't think you can't, you know, it can happen, but it's just not something that we've ever been passionate about. We don't want to do player interviews. We don't want to do the things the journalists already do, bit like you lads, because you told me there's only one word you can't say. Like, if you do that, if you take that route, then there's lots you can't say and lots you can't ask. And that's not just Newcastle, by the way. That would be any football club at any top level. But so that was really nice that he was willing to do that. And him and Darren Eales actually came to the previous live show we did. I think we're going to try and get them to maybe the next live show, the one after that as well. But, you know, whatever people think about ticketing at the club or the commercialization of it or whatever, I just think so few senior people at football clubs would just sit down and do a podcast like that. So I was really grateful to him for that, and the club as a whole for allowing it.
Yeah, and it's rare that you get, you know, people, you know, from those levels of football clubs willing to come in, especially it's still early days, and for, you know, they might not even know what to expect because there's just so much going on. Okay. I have another question here. Best/funniest Newcastle United anecdote or a chance encounter, or like you said, something you could probably say to us now, Alex, that you wouldn't be able to say if you were officially affiliated with the club, maybe.
Tough. We put me on the spot there with funny. I'm trying to think. This isn't funny, right? But I launched. It was something we called it Gallagher Flags in 2016, and it was kind of to bring flags to St James's. And me and Michael Martin started it, but it was an overall team effort of about like 20 dedicated volunteers, and we expected to raise a couple of £100 to put a couple of flags in the southeast corner, and we raised like 16 grand or something. Newcastle just been relegated. We didn't expect it. And the Chronicle, Mark Douglas, who's a good friend, but he really got behind it. You know, we know him very well. And we had this massive build-up to the first display against Huddersfield at home in the Championship. And Newcastle's first two games that season were Fulham away and Huddersfield at home, who'd finished 19th and 20th the previous season. And it's just screamed 6 points. And we lost at Fulham. I was there. Terrible. Famous tweet by Fulham when they did their welcome to the Championship thing. And then we saw, okay, it's okay. We've got Huddersfield next week. They're absolutely hopeless. They'll probably get relegated. And we got beat 2-1 and deservedly beat. And we had, obviously we're novices at this, and the cleanup operation was shit. we let the club down a little bit with that first game. But there was like thousands and thousands of flags. Where do you keep them? And we keep, there just wasn't space for them, and they ended up going in one of the box office rooms. And at the end of the game, there was someone sat in the dugout, head in hands, and we were already under pressure to get out because they were literally locking the gates. And it looked like this guy was crying, was devastated, and the stewards assumed it was one of our lot who'd either had too much to drink, was devastated about the fact we might have to come back the following day or on a weekday to sort this, because we played Reading at home 4 days later. So we had to get them cleared out so the box office got blah, blah. And I went over, and it was Paul Dummett who'd played. So it's not a funny story particularly, and he was just devastated. He was he was just sat there slumped over, obviously probably emotionally the build-up of the game and seeing maybe assume that the flags display and the atmosphere and Rafa Benitez's first game and the opposition. And I was just like, oh, mate, we've got to leave. We've got to go. They're throwing us out. And he was just like, oh, no bother. So that'll stay with me. I mean, Paul Dummett, Everton at home, that's probably like the last memory people have him, which is a bit sad, but great servant at Newcastle. And no one could doubt, just an absolute die-hard Newcastle United fan who and it's like, again, talking a bit about Gabriel Clark, the journalist, it's like rare you get this kind of, not that I interacted much with him, but see a footballer in that environment where obviously just absolutely as devastated as any fan, if not more so.
That's the fact
That's up
that
there.
the steward thought it was some fella after a few pints who just like was just in a terrible place. That's Paul Dummett. That's mad. I mean, I know I don't want to talk too much, but you wouldn't see players from certain other teams, particularly red ones, that gutted after a defeat. I can tell you that much. Nice. No. As you said, it's not a funny story or a happy one, but there is something kind of nice about it. It almost typifies what we all care about as Newcastle fans. Right, and the last quick fire. Do you know what, Alan? I'm going to let you ask the last quick fire question. This came in from Kieran. Kieran in the Irish Mags group, and I know this made you chuckle, but it'd be interesting to see what the answer is.
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this with you're not allowed to say any of us three because I have a feeling it was going to be me. So is there any particular Newcastle United podcaster that you don't get on with, or anyone in the fanzine site that you don't get on with or have a bit of beef with, shall we say?
The question was, who's the biggest arsehole in the
Newcastle
United?
I tried to be real diplomatic.
Who's the biggest?
We don't do diplomatic.
I have to say, I'm not very online, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of these beefs are all online. They're not real life. I don't know loads of other people. I've been on shows like this, and it's nice. It's really good to meet people like this and chat with them. And all of them, this is probably like the 10th one I've done, and everyone's always been really, really sound. I'm honestly trying to think from a Newcastle perspective if there's anyone, but because I don't spend that much time online, I just don't know a lot of the other guys in the community.
What about opposition?
I kind of
any particular opposition encounters you've had?
Yeah, like I went and did a thing for a gambling company in London, and a guy called Rory Smith was there. He was a Chelsea YouTuber, and he's a pro. Like he's a broadcast. He's good at what he does. But there was all sorts of fireworks before that about people being late, what trains they got, and I just thought, fucking hell, that's just it's a football video for a gambling company. Like we are not players like waiting to get on the team bus. Yeah, so I'm not trying to dig out Rory in particular, but he knows his stuff. He's very successful, but the whole it was like a different world. It was like, when we do this stuff and you talk with the other Newcastle fans, everyone's always pretty sound. That was just like, I don't want to say prima donna, that would be too much, but it was just like very much like this. These are the elite guys, and they're important, and it's run almost like they are footballers, I suppose. And maybe I don't know that industry that well. Maybe they are. Maybe these are the guys at the top of the game. They didn't ask me to come back. So, maybe I didn't really fit
maybe
in with
you're
the
the
style
biggest
and what to
arsehole
do.
in the.
Yeah, exactly. But that was a fairly uncomfortable experience. Not that any of them, they were all polite, fine, and good chat about football on and off screen, but the atmosphere was very. It wasn't what I was expecting for fellow football fans. I thought it was going to be a bit of a chat and and it was a very intense kind of thing.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing as well and answering the questions, of course. It's always good to hear a little bit of the entertaining side of some of the work you do. Obviously, when we listen to podcasts and the productions, you get a certain content in a certain way, but it's nice to hear some of the off-the-cuff things as well. Right, we're going to take a very, very quick break, and when we return, we will be having a quick chat about the fixture list before moving on to pick Alex's brain completely apart even further. He's going to earn his wages that we're not paying him over the next half an hour, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to part 2 of the Irish Mags Show with myself, Alan, Tev, and our very special guest, Alex Hurst from the True Faith podcast. Alex, we're going to start diving into some key topics around Newcastle, particularly ahead of next season. But just before we do that, on the day of recording, peep behind the curtain, if you will, the Newcastle United and Premier League fixtures were announced. So we thought we might just pick your brain on, your instant reaction, I guess, to the fixtures. In particular, obviously opening and closing and some of the runs that we have in between. Is there anything that jumps out? I know one thing that's jumped out to me is definitely the very end of the season, because it's a bit of a change. But maybe you could give us your thoughts on when you first digested that fixture list. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, dream fixture list for me. Absolutely delighted with it. The start of the season is so kind. Newcastle, they're going to be without Sandro Tonali for the start of the season, who should be an essential player, an influential player this season. So that Southampton statistically is the easiest game because they came through the playoffs in the Championship. We've got the best possible fixture of all of the 20 clubs would have taken that fixture, or other than 19 clubs would have taken that fixture. So that's great. There's a lot of 22, 23 similarities. Bournemouth finished 10th or 11th last season, something like that. And we had Forest opening day 22, 23, who were also the promoted Championship side. And then we went to Brighton, who'd finished 10th or 11th the previous season. By the time Man City come to town at the end of September, we should have also played a League Cup second round game, possibly a third round game. Like our season could be well underway. Like it could, we could be top 2, top 3 if all goes to plan in the fourth round of the League Cup. So that's the most important thing. We saw last season what damage a difficult season can do. And then the nice little things, Boxing Day at home is great. We kind of got it last year against Forest, it was 12:30, which is rubbish. And the team and the fan base were just knackered for that fixture. So I don't really count it. So Boxing Day at home's brill. And then, Villa and Man U over the Christmas period. Villa, Man U, Spurs is a tough Christmas period, but you'd think, I'd expect us to beat Villa and I'd expect us to do much better at, I imagine, a pathetic Manchester United. The thing about Ten Hag and Man U is even if he improves in the season, they should finish about 12th. That's how bad they were last season. They finished 8th by some miracle. So, actually, when you think of a Christmas period, I think of all the kind of the good periods Newcastle have had, or good seasons. We always have to do well over Christmas. And even, again, 22-23 win at Leicester. We drew at home with Leeds, was a bit disappointing. But then we're going to get that great point at Arsenal. And kind of, that was the first game they'd failed to score. And it was the first home point they'd dropped. And their air of invincibility fell. So we had a really good Christmas period then. So just, you're right, Paul, about the end of the season. But there's two ways I look at it. Number one, if we're having a great season, then we bounce into those games and we back ourselves. And if it's gone a bit wrong, then it's a bit like, well, they're tough games and we aren't going to achieve anything anyway. So I love the fixture list. It's the first sign that our luck is changing. We needed a good fixture list. That's what we needed it to. Because you might want to talk about the manager in a bit, but I think Howe needed that. He deserves that. Whatever criticisms I've got of him, he deserved a good fixture list after last season's nonsense with injuries, with Tonali and with the cup draws. So I'm buzzing, lads. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I
think
it's really
agree.
good.
It's lovely to see that we have a home game to finish off the season as well. It feels like a little while since we've had that. And just Tev, from an Irish Mags perspective, obviously we think about traveling and weekends and all that. Now, as much as anyone, but sometimes more, we're at the mercy of things like schedule changes and, let's put this game on TV and fuck the fans and we've all got flights booked and now I'm supposed to fly home at half time. From an Irish Mag's perspective, and particularly for the listeners who'll be looking at, okay, shit, should I start booking up some flights? Like, is there any particular games or weekends that stand out to you, early doors, or what advice would you give?
I think the first game of the season, I was there last year when we had Villa at home, and obviously we know that it finished 6-1, etc. But just the buzz around, obviously, when we travel to games, it's all about the experience. As you know, obviously it doesn't start at 3 p.m. It starts at 4:30, 3:30 in the morning. So that experience, I remember even for the Nottingham Forest game this evening, for the Aston Villa game, it was brilliant. We could go down, we can mingle, we can talk to locals, etc. But just being there, first game of the season, was fantastic. So again, we have Tottenham. The only thing about the Spurs game, just in terms of demand, I think it's Sandro's first game. It's going to be the end of August. Sandro's the band, so that game is going to be a celebration if you ever seen one. So again, it's just being a part of the movement. Again, it's all about ruthlessness as well. So if we can go and get the points that we need, even the likes of Bournemouth away, like, they're a bogey team. We don't beat Bournemouth. But I think we should change the mentality if we're looking to get Champions League this season. So, again, from an Irish Mag's perspective, we already know the story. We're already looking at Ryanair and Aer Lingus flights yesterday at the moment. Not even today. Yesterday, regardless of what the games were in August, we'd be there, But I think, it's a huge opportunity,
And the other thing as well, Alex kind of touched on it, like there'll be League Cup games in there. And we talked about this before in the pod. Remember we had John on, obviously from the States, and there could be an opportunity to get 2 games in 4 days. So, that's if you've got a bit of a holiday or time off that you need to bank and book off, that might be something to watch out for as well. Excellent. Okay, cool. Keeping an eye on time, and I've so much more we need to get out of Alex as well. Let's move over to our spotlight topic, lads. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we did want to have a chat to Alex. Again, bearing in mind he's a man of few words. He doesn't have those strong opinions that we don't like to hear on the Irish Mag show. But really and truly, Alex, we really wanted to kind of pick your brain apart on some of those key topic focus areas we mentioned. The first of which would be management and tactics. Let's say looking back on last season and then carrying that forward into next season. And I guess, I've heard you talk before, the lads have heard you talk before on True Faith, particularly about Eddie Howe. And I'll pitch it as Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall and the whole thing together, really. In terms of just, it's been a couple of seasons. Yes, there was incredibly bad luck. We had all of the injuries in the world and groups of death and ridiculous global bans for Italian footballers. But just in terms of tactical decisions, handling of game management, and thinking ahead to next season, assuming we don't have these ridiculous injury crises, I suppose, where would you be in terms of rating Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall now? Do you think it's going to be more of the same going forward? And that includes, your 4-3-3 kind of standard setup. Do you think we expect to see majority of the same? Some different personnel and obviously returning personnel, but largely the same tactical kind of outlook?
Yeah, I think you'll see more of the same. I know last pre-season they messed about with 5 at the back for a bit. It didn't really translate into anything this season. I think I'm being fairly critical of how I'm still behind him. Still a big fan of his. I'm just fairly critical of the things he's got wrong. I think you'll see less of that next season because he isn't going to have to make big decisions on replacement players. So, one of the worst things he did this season for me is go and play the same formation at Palace that beat Spurs. He got Spurs so right. It was such a victory for him as much as the lads who played. And I walked away from that stadium. I was recording a podcast myself just on the walk home for like an instant reaction that we do after each game. And the thought just entered my mind. It was like, he's going to pick the same formation and team against Palace, isn't he? Because those lads did well in that fixture in a different scenario. And Palace beat West Ham 5-0, maybe something like that. The game that we beat Spurs and then a weekend off because we were possibly out the cup. That would have been it. Our opponent was in the semi-final. Man U. That's who we should have played. We should have played Man U then. The week after we'd beaten Spurs. That's frustrating to think back of how that all turned out. And I just thought, it's like you're trying to enjoy this moment, and then it's like he's so predictable at times that he's just going to pick it doesn't matter who the opposition is. And Palace had beaten West Ham, and West Ham played a 4-3-3, and that made you think, oh well, was it because of that? But it went so badly wrong against Palace, and again with Howe is he often makes the change only after we've conceded. So things are going badly against Palace. They're waltzing through us. We've got no midfield. We can't get out. We can't keep the ball. We're trying to go back to front relatively quickly with Isak and Gordon playing as a two up front, but we just can't get them in the game. He should have changed it after 5 or 10 minutes, and we have to wait until we concede, and then he'll change it. He did the same at Old Trafford. Towards the end of the season, he modified his tactics to try and play Gordon and Isak kind of as a two. Put Gordon inside when all he was doing was removing the best player in the team from the left-hand side of the pitch. We go 1-0 down, he changes it back to 4-3-3. We get into the game, we get an equaliser, we should have won. If people haven't heard me before, you probably think I'm very down on how there are a lot of good things he does. But I don't think next season he'll have to look into those decisions, or he's not going to have to play the mad formation that he played against Spurs, because everyone or most players should be fit. So I expect him to get it right. I expect to see more of the same. I expect them to be better at the back. Nick Pope is massive. I think, if they are trying to sign James Trafford, it makes a ton of sense. People don't like spending money on reserve goalkeepers. I get it, particularly when money's potentially short. But our season fell apart so badly at times with Martin Dubravka just made Newcastle look like Eddie Howe's Bournemouth team on a bad day. That's ultimately what happens. And I think the fact Howe's recognised that and made a goalkeeper a priority is really important, because it kind of shows that they know what they've got to fix. And I think next season we'll do really well. I think if we keep players fit, and we had maybe like 2 first team players in an attacking sense, like that literally goes straight into the team, not lads for the bench, then the good thing about Howe last season that gets lost is at the start of last season, when we looked at what Newcastle had to do better to build on the season before. Could they get better than 4th? Could they get close to the top 2? The number one thing by mile was score more goals. Their goal output in 22-23 was way below the top sides. It was the defence that propelled us to that height. Well, actually, they did that last season. In fact, they did it. They actually outscored some of those top sides, which is pretty remarkable when you think about the injury issues. They played 4 games without a striker last season, and funny enough, scored 4 against Luton, but didn't score in any of the other games without a striker. So if they can get the defence back to something like what it was, and they can maintain that attacking threat, then they'll fly up the league.
Yeah, and I think as you look at the season before last, it was all about the defence, right? Best defensive record in the Premier League. I think we were level with City in that sense. And as well, it was all about the coaching. Like, he was improving. Like, Almiron had that phenomenal run and was just, he wasn't great last season, but that season before, Eddie Howe he's taking the likes of Cher and Longstaff to an extent, Tambering. He's getting as much out of them as he can. You'd like to think that the absence of having to make a lot of those decisions and having his hand forced might allow them to actually go back to focus on some of those basics as well. Okay, great. Moving on then, it's probably a little bit connected to management, but it's more about from an organizational perspective, Alex, and even on the commercial sense as well. And I have to start. We just have to start because I'm amazed it's still not over yet, and that this dance is still being done. The Dan Ashworth saga. This has been dragging on for an awful long time, and as much as I often say things about Newcastle that I'm so proud of that you don't see with other clubs, I feel like this is not helpful to anyone really, that this is still going on. Yes, we're digging in our heels in terms of the financial elements and what's the right thing to do. But this needs to be put away surely as early as possible in the summer and not carry on anywhere close to next season, Alex, right?
I agree. I also think it's okay to say it is a real bad thing for the club to lose the man that they entrusted with their future kind of football vision with is leaving. Not the club's fault, it's not Newcastle's fault, but it is a bad thing. That's okay to say. I think we kind of get bogged down in the anti-Man U stuff and the frustration about their 25% owners, constant public talking about it. But it is like a real blow. They paid a lot of money to get him, and also kind of I'm less interested about Ashworth than I am about the replacement. And we still don't have that, and it's also bad news that they went after Dougie Freedman and he turned them down for Palace, because Palace looked really good, and Dougie Freedman has such a long history with Palace. But also, you'd expect a club of Newcastle's caliber to be able to get someone from a club like Palace. that's bad news as well. And then we've heard almost nothing since about a replacement. And there are some doubts about the direction of the club at the top level. They've achieved an awful lot in a short space of time. So I think even if there are doubts, and it's okay to have doubts, that you can also say they've got nearly everything else right, and that's a good thing and bodes well for the future. But it just seems like, we had this crazy forward momentum for a while, and then we've gone backwards last season for reasons we've talked about. And then you just, like you say, Paul, you just want everything to be sorted at the top level so that everyone can concentrate on the team. And instead, you've got this thing rumbling on. I agree with you. It just needs sorted for the start of the season. But to be fair, from Newcastle's perspective, the longer you can keep Dan Ashworth out of Old Trafford, and the longer there's a gap there in terms of their rebuilding project, the more damage it does them. So maybe it's not just about the compensation; it's about actually trying to do a rival damage. And we talked earlier about ruthlessness. They are being ruthless with Ashworth here, and I respect that.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe if it was any other club, there might be a slightly less ruthless approach, but I think there's enough history there that it kind of makes sense in a way. But yeah, the replacement is going to be important, and I think the sooner that comes in, the better. But that said, I mean, even while all this is going on, we still see a hell of a lot of forward movement and progress from a commercial perspective, from a sponsorship perspective, all rolling into this magic PSR FFP thing that is hanging over everyone's heads. Again, Alex, having seen firsthand the evolution, knowing how much of an underachiever we were as a big player, as a big football club under Mike Ashley and fucking Lee Charnley, sponsorship, commercial development, Sella Cup, Australia, as much as that was madness, and Japan, like, do you like what you see in terms of what's being done on the commercial element in terms of driving the revenue? Because that's far more enjoyable conversation than we need to sell Bruno. And we need to sell it, do you know what I mean? So how's your view on that in terms of the activities that have been done and the way we're moving in that direction with revenue?
You've got to say it's all moving in the right direction. The fact that they are building things around the ground, temporary club shop, the stack, that's all good. That's all like actually making a difference to the community on a match day. The partnership with Adidas that we've known about for a year, that's huge for the club. It's huge financially, and it just brings them into a kind of, again, in terms of exposure, and being able to say we partner with Adidas, not just that we partner with them, but we are one of their elite clubs, their elite partners. That's huge. That'll open other commercial doors for them. It's a funny one because, and I don't know the answer to this, but there's a feeling from what Amanda Staveley has said publicly that they just did not see the Premier League bringing in the associated party rule. I kind of put a tweet out recently and I said, why did the Premier League bring it in then if it wasn't just for Newcastle? And I got a couple of replies saying UEFA had brought something in and there was stuff in the pipeline. They just kind of brought it forward for Newcastle. Regardless, it blindsided Newcastle. If that hadn't come in, and as a fan, you can think rightly or wrongly, how should football work? How should it be run? What's allowed? What's fair? What's not fair? As a fan, I find it frustrating having been to fucking Man City however many times of the years and stood in that away and getting smashed by an oil state, only for us to try and have the same benefit and be told, no, that's out of order. That is fundamentally unfair. Now, there are broader questions within that, and there's definitely an argument to say sovereign states or the investment funds of those states shouldn't own football clubs. But that is a different conversation to a very specific set of rules that not only blindsided the owners of our club, clearly are seen by other clubs in the league to be so calamitous that they're willing to spend tens of millions of pounds trying to derail the league because of it. So it's a really serious situation. So I think they got blindsided by that, and then all of their plans that they probably spent months and years and had in place and had ready to go had to be completely shelved. And they've had to go from scratch. They've made a lot of appointments in that area. They're building from the ground up. So I think, again, it's not even been 3 years, has it? It's not even been 3 years since the takeover at the time we're talking here. So they've probably, in terms of how hard it is to do multi-million-pound deals quickly, they're probably doing incredibly well. But as a football fan, you always want more. You think, why didn't we have a training sponsor last season? Because most other clubs, could we have signed a player? Could we have got a player in on loan, a decent player on loan in January if we had a training ground sponsor? There'll be reasons for this. that we'll never find out about, because that this part of the game is so sensitive, and that everyone's fighting for the same sponsorship. But overall, good. You just have to look at the turnover of the club going up and up and up and up, and that's how they get round PSR if they can, is by getting these kind of deals done. And you just got to hope we do enough of them quickly enough to not have to sell a Bruno or an Isak.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much more preferable to, what did Chelsea do? Sell your own hotel.
Sell the hotel, yeah.
Hotel.
I keep saying in our group we need to sell either St. James's to ourselves. I know the council own it. The council should donate it to Newcastle. We should sell it to ourselves, and then we donate it back, and then we just do what we want. Chelsea can do it. We can do it.
That's insane.
Chelsea can do a lot.
Yeah, they can go and fuck off as well. It's insane that this is what clubs are resorting to. Like that this is where we've reached, and obviously they're already looking at changing because it's not working. But to have to sit there and be in that situation, it's a bit mad. It's gotten a little bit out of hand. No more than VAR has grown out of hand as well. So yeah, look, we'll see. But I think the club, I think there's a consensus that the club are doing as much of the right things as possible to navigate it. And probably the important thing, well, I don't want to speak too soon, lads, and jinx it, but I probably just have, what is there, 10 days until Bruno's clause expires. So fingers crossed that won't be a thing either, because we just don't need it. Alex, the third category was fan experience. You briefly touched on it there. You mentioned the stack kind of stuff, the fan zones. Just combining that with the stadium plans, and again, obviously, this is the Irish Mags show where obviously we travel over, but we equally are as passionate about St. James's Park and awarding yourselves. How do you feel about what we've heard so far in terms of maybe there's potential to expand a little bit? Do you think we should have heard more by now, or do you think it's just that unclear?
I have a question for you, lads. Really, that ties into that perfectly, Paul. And it ties back into the commercialization you talked about, and interesting for all of your Irish-based viewers and listeners, or viewers and listeners who are just based outside of the UK who watch your show. The conversation. And it's one of the worst things about last season for me is how toxic it became online between Newcastle supporters regarding tickets. It just became horrible accusations, conspiracy theories, and that draws down from the lack of transparency the club have over ticketing. They should say, this is how many tickets are season ticket holders. This is how many go into the membership ballot. This is how many we keep back for other purposes. This is how many are corporate. Same for away games. They should say, this many tickets go to season ticket holders, this many go to corporate, this many go to players. And people would not like what they say, some people, but at least everyone would know where they stand, and there would be no accusations of this and that. And I don't know whether you guys picked up on it. I don't know whether it's a conversation in your WhatsApp groups, whatever, but some people have a real bee in their bonnet about international fans. And not just international fans, what the club would call growing the fan base. And the club would want to grow the fan base without PSR. But within PSR, growing your fan base is actually, you simply have to do it. You have to try and get to the level of Man United, of Liverpool, of Arsenal, of Spurs, of Chelsea, with these huge fan bases outside and inside the UK. They don't just want to do it internationally, but international fans like yourselves tend to be, more willing to put a lot of time and effort and money into these trips, and that's great for the club because it's a great story for them. It's also great for them commercially because you lads will know Liverpool and Man United fans, who those clubs are way more advanced with how they cater for international fans, I think, anyway, than Newcastle. Like, have you found that conversation this season? Because I found it as a fan born and bred here, who's got the best seat in the house for me at St. James's Park, and I go to any game I want, home and away. I found it just like unbelievably toxic and unfair on lots of people, but particularly on international fans. It just seems to be like as the club gets better, and if St. James's Park isn't getting much bigger anytime soon, that conversation's not going anywhere. Like, how was that for you guys this season? Did you experience it? If you did so, how does it make you feel?
I did once.
Or Alan,
I'm going to jump in here because I did once, and I shut your man up instantly. He was you've had X, Y, and Z. How many games? I turned around and was like, look, my money was good enough for the club when we were absolutely dire in the championship. My money's good enough for the club now. You can just leave it at that. And your man looked at me going, I was like, exactly. I was like, I was at 14 of our home games in the second year we were in the championship. I was like, what do you want me to do here now that we're actually good? Not go to the games. I was like, stick it up your hole. You're just trying to be, if you're not from Newcastle, you're not allowed to come. Now, it's a very small minority of fans that are like that, but that's just my response every time. My money was good enough back when we were dirt, so it's good enough when we're good. So it ends the conversation instantly.
Yeah. I think with this, Alex, like we've been talking about this a lot, just in terms of amongst ourselves with other supporters groups, etc. So I think awareness and clarity is key, because a lot this international term is being kind of a sticker being used for everybody. So when they see us come over with the branding, etc., it's you're this group, you're that group. But the one thing that we're in is a community of Newcastle fans, regardless, you know, in terms of the start. So if you think about it from us, like we're our group have been going on to the 90s and 80s. We've been the Irish Mags. Obviously, we had the original Irish Newcastle United supporters group, which have been traveling games in the 80s and the 90s and the noughts, etc. We've seen the highs of highs, lows of lows. So got lads in Ireland have been taking the ferry, etc. And when we kind of talk about going to games, there's some lads that have been to Champions League games kind of the season prior and then been home the same night. So it's not like we're staying there, we're in the, like we'll get stuff in the club store, but I think there's this perception that we go in, we spend about €300 in the club store, then we go to Strawberry, we spend €300, and then we look and we didn't get 4 digits yet, so we'll spend another 300. No, like we're watching the money as well. You know, some of us are coming back the same day that we come back. But I think awareness and transparency is key. I had a situation for, I think it was the Tottenham game, where I was sitting in the Millburn paddock. I got a ticket from the ballot, and I was sitting in between 4 or 5 season ticket holders. And just I heard when I was about to sit down, I heard someone say, "Do you think he's a season ticket holder?" And I turned around and I said, "There's no reason for me to season ticket holder. I'm just watching the game." But you're in the Millburn paddock. Blame the club. Don't blame me. You know. So there's these conversations. So we hear it a lot. But again, at the end of the day, it's a lack of awareness, lack of clarity. You know, I don't go up to people and say, "Where do you live in?" Any what? No, because I don't care, you know. But I don't need to justify, I've support. Like I have family, my mom's sister married someone in Newcastle, so I've a place to stay every time I go to Newcastle. So how am I a tourist? But I also have family. And it's not just me, everyone else does as well. So I just think it's a lack of awareness and clarity. And maybe the club shop, maybe the shack, maybe kind of initials from the club to get people together might be nice. Even the likes that you were saying, Alex, in terms of True Faith, having these events, etc., getting fans from kind of different countries, etc., to mingle. Obviously, we can't speak for other kind of international groups as this term is kind of coming up. But for the Irish Mags, we're just a group of Newcastle fans from Ireland, you know. So again, we're just simple as that, you know. And I think if anybody asks questions or stuff like that or international, I'd say to them, come up to us, have a chat with us. You see us with the gear, you know. Alan's had Paul. We've all spoken to people in Newcastle. Majority are friendly enough, you know.
I think until Alex, you kind of mentioned it, until it's clear, like there will always be that subset of people who will think, well, the club are just putting, 1,000 tickets over here to the highest bidder. Now, if they were doing that first, I mean, we wouldn't be going. But like, if that is happening, and it may well be happening, right? Then, unless that's made clear, people will always think, well, if you're not from here, or if you're an international fan, you're in that seat because you're paid more than my mate would have paid. That kind of stuff. So it goes back to, like you said, how many memberships are there? How many season tickets are there? What's the story with the ballots? Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, all that kind of stuff. Whether it'll ever be clear or not, I don't know. But I think until that's done, some of that dynamic probably will not go away. But to the lad's point, I mean, I've got photos of myself 6 years old holding a hurl. I won't even go into what a hurl is if you don't know, but it's an old Irish sport standing in a field full of cows. Like, like we've all been fans for a long time, and we've enough to justify it, I suppose. Not that we feel we need to, but it's there. Right. Just to round off the section, then the last section, and potentially the most interesting one, Alex, probably can be summed up by a question we actually got by one of our Irish mags as well. I think it was John. He basically said, will Eddie be ruthless enough, clearing out the existing squad where it needs to be, and then obviously adding in players to replace them? So I guess that's a divide of existing squad. Do you actually think that we will clear out players we feel just shouldn't, based on performances and maybe even age, be at the club? And what that will do then in terms of the key roles that need to be filled. And I'd love to hear some of your opinions on that as well.
It's a really good question, and it's a really important point for next season. There's two ways of looking at it. Someone like two players, Sean Longstaff, Dan Burn. Eddie Howe loves them. He absolutely loves them. He adores them. sadly, and if you listened, Paul, and anyone else listens, when we did the you might have had to be a patron for this bit. Apologies, but the question came in on stage with the journos, and it was about Lewis Hall and Dan Burn, and the journos essentially said Eddie Howe is clear on this. Dan Burn is his number one left back. Now, as a fan, having looked at the performances of Lewis Hall and Dan Burn, I can't understand that. I know who I want to be playing left back. It's more to do, I think, with leadership and Newcastle's inability, in Howe's opinion, to effectively defend set pieces. But it just seems mental. Now, it's one thing saying, should he continue to play Dan Burn and Sean Longstaff? It's another Newcastle getting bids for them and Howe not wanting to sell. So I don't know that Newcastle are going to get bids for either. Now, Sean Longstaff is a particular one because he's younger. There's a lot of, it's 100%, whatever they call it, book profit on him because we didn't play a transfer fee from him. I think if Newcastle get a good offer from Howe would let him go as long as he can get a better player in. That's different to him picking him ahead of Sandro Tonali, for example. It's different to him, Liverpool at home, we're 1-0 up, gets 10-man control in the game, he takes off Tonali for Longstaff because that just seems to be the pre-planned sub at the time, just because Longstaff has to play. So there's two parts to it. So one, I think if he did get an offer, he'd sell because it's so important PSR-wise, but I'm not convinced he's moved past picking these players in the first team next season.
Yeah, we chatted about it a few weeks ago, myself and Alan. We were looking at kind of like players in the squad, and the way I felt about certain players was almost like I don't want Eddie to be able to pick them. And at the time we were kind of chatting about Alex Murphy, and great potential player, and he's Irish and he's from Galway, where I'm from, and I'm like, Kraft or Dummett are in his way, and Eddie Howe will happily pick them because they're probably less of a risk or a gamble. But I want Eddie to have to pick him in the need, if he needed to, because other players are injured. I want him to fall back on younger players. I keep saying, look what Liverpool did when they brought through Bradley and Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa's now in the England scheme, because he had to bring him in. I want those kind of opportunities to be clear. By as I said, removing those tried and trusted players from Eddie's choice, let's say. In terms of the names that are going around, Alex, it's everyone's hearing the same ones. You mentioned Longstaff. In terms of where we might actually earn cash, Trippier's name is still floating around, and there's Bayern talks that haven't gone away. Miggy, Callum Wilson, are you kind of on the same page of agreement? Like they're the types of players we should be looking at, or is there, would your kind of idea on where we could make money and should stretch beyond the obvious ones that are being talked about?
I think all of those lads should go. I don't think any of them should have been given new contracts. I think it was a lack of ruthlessness, like a foresight, not just from Howe, but from Ashworth or everyone in the club. He got them to perform way above the level in 22, 23. It's very hard with footballers to do that consistently. There's always going to be a reversion to their actual level, and sadly we saw that for large parts last season. Wilson's a little bit different because it's more injuries with him than lack of end product, but it's hard because, again, going back to the PSR thing, you'd think Sean Longstaff, Elliot Anderson, and Lewis Miley are our most saleable assets in terms of PSR value, which is a massive shame, and it shouldn't be like that. It's a total nonsense, but I think they'd get money for Anderson if they could. I think Howe would definitely sell Anderson over Longstaff. In terms of everyone else, there's not really anyone you can afford to lose. I mean, Sven Botman's not going to leave. He's injured. He didn't have a good season last season. If he had an unbelievable season again last season, I think there'd be a lot of people swooping around him for big money. Bruno and Isak are the obvious ones that I think Newcastle just aren't going to sell Isak for any price. And beyond that, you're struggling. I mean, I know we're short on time, but I think Harvey Barnes is just emblematic of Newcastle's problematic transfer strategy. I think he's great. I really like him. We were not in a position to get rid of one backup left midfielder in Alison Maximin and bring in another one for 38 million quid, which is a large part of our budget if he's not going to play. And maybe he brings him in because he's not sure Gordon's going to have the season he does, but we are not a good enough side to have 38 million pound players sat on the bench. And I just don't understand that one at all, because Howe doesn't seem to fancy him.
And that probably takes us very well on to the actual question of roles to be filled. There seems to be a very common consensus. We talked about the goalkeeper position. I think it's clear they do want backup in there. There's also a big whisper about Asmir Begovic coming in as a third choice keeper, which is, I mean, okay, fine, why not? Um, Defender, centre back seems to be very much up there in terms of commentary, whatever about Eddie Howe in the club, and obviously right winger and striker. But like, do you, again, looking at roles to be filled, Alex, thinking about players that might go, you know, people are probably frustrated that we're spending our first 16 million of the window or 20 million on James Trafford and not going out and getting a right winger when realistically, you know, it's basically Jacob Murphy next season if Miggy goes. So like, where I guess where would you spend the money is probably the biggest question.
Right wing without a doubt. Right wing without a doubt. You look at the output of Isak and Gordon, and if you can get a player half as good as that front three will be pretty special. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of looked on, like took a statistical approach to what Newcastle needed to do next season to try and get back to a level or improve. And Jacob Murphy's successful passing percentage was 66%, and that's just so far below the other kind of top 20 wingers in the league. It's like, you know, 14, 15%. And sometimes with wingers and forward players, you want them taking brave passes, and, you know, not always taking safe options. But Newcastle can't keep the ball in kind of difficult situations. Like I mentioned Crystal Palace. If we had been able to keep the ball more effectively against Palace and play through their press, then the game changes. But we give the ball back to them. Players like Murphy, regardless of what people think, he is just not at a technical level. Neither. So if your right side includes Jacob Murphy and Sean Longstaff, they cannot keep the ball as well as most other Premier League players in their position, and they both need upgrades as a result. There's only so long you can play without the ball and try and manage a game, and yet it's like a Rafa Benitez version of managing a game. You can do it without the ball, but you're playing a very defensive type of football. They've just got to get a better player in right wing. Murphy and Almiron, they've done good things for Newcastle, but as a football club and a fan base, people need to recognise that it goes back to what your man said before, John, in the WhatsApp group. It's all about ruthlessness at this level, and we've got. We cannot go into the season with those two that you mentioned as the right. We won't finish fourth if those two are in the team. They're just not good. They'll do some good things. They'll do some nice things. They'll score some goals. They'll have some assists. They're just not good enough as footballers. So I'd spend as much of the budget as possible on that position. The rest of the positions with injuries are okay. There's strength and depth. There's Tonali coming back for the midfield. Joe Willett coming back for the midfield. He had a massive season before last and didn't play much last year. So, you know, Jamal Lascelles and Sven Botman will come back at centre back. They've got Kraft as a backup. They've got Lloyd Kelly's just signed as centre back. So I'd love a new right centre back. Great, but it isn't the glaring weakness that right wing is. If statistically it's a shit show right wing for Newcastle, and I'd spend if it took 80% of the budget to get a good right wing, I think the impact on the team could be so big. You mentioned Kieran Trippier there. Look at Tino Livramento as well. Those two have been playing with like rubbish. Sorry to say it, like rubbish right wingers who get nowhere near another Premier League top 10 side. All of the other players on that right side of the pitch will get better with a good right winger too. So you're not just improving that position; you're improving right back, you're improving right midfield.
So on that position, then I think we're all in agreement, and I suppose the whole fan base is in agreement. With a mix of realism and optimism, I'm going to ask you for a name. Who would you be looking like? Who would be your like? I would sleep very well that night if we've signed that player.
It's really hard because a lot of Newcastle's biggest signings, not all of them, but a lot of them just come completely out of the blue, don't they? All the fake in the nose and all that kind of stuff. They just don't see it coming. So it's probably someone we don't know. That's what I think. It's probably someone we don't know. I do remember in 2020, summer 22, there was a lot of noise about Chiesa at Juventus, and he played for Italy in the final in 21 and had a great game. And I think Howe is a fan of his, and he's got a lot of injury issues in his output's been up and down in an average team. In Serie A the last couple of seasons, but that's someone who I think matches the Eddie Howe profile of being a great pro, of just wanting to do loads of running, of high intensity, of chasing the ball down, being part of a press. He ticks all those boxes. Is he good? What would he cost? Was he good value for money? Is he the best deal Newcastle could get? I have no idea, but that's my name for you.
He started the Euros quite well, actually. I think he got man of the match.
DJ got player of the match.
Over Albania. Yeah. So add 20 billion if he keeps playing like that.
Naturally.
But like we said, I think we're all in agreement with that role, and I think it would make a lot of fans a lot happier to see us prioritising, like what you described there, Alex, a glaring gap or an obvious weakness in the side as well. Excellent. Anything else, lads, between us? I think we've taken a lot of Alex's time there. We know he has his own new arrival, a new transfer window signing arrived in the house that he needs to go and take care of. Alex, thank you so much for giving up all your time and all your insights and opinions. Really appreciate you coming on, and I know our listeners would as well, because obviously a lot of us will have heard you speaking on the True Faith podcast and love hearing all your opinions and insights. But for those that don't know, the small few, Alex, where can people find you without giving away your address and postcode?
I'm on Twitter, X at TFAlex8092, and then the True Faith YouTube channel, True Faith podcast. Just search True Faith NUFC into that. I used to do my own YouTube channel, which was going pretty well, and life just got in the way. So I might start that again this season. I don't know, but if I get a bit more time. But that's it really. And then if anyone's listening, would love to see as many of you as possible at any live shows coming up. Like I said earlier, we get a massive buzz when it's kind of a nice part of people's weekend, considering the effort you all make to get to the games and the cost. So tickets will be on sale this week. Just keep an eye on True Faith social media, and I'd love to say that they'll go really quick. They will all go eventually, but I think the venue holds about 160, so it's not as big as some of the other venues that we do. So it's a little bit more intimate. It's a great place. It's only a couple of metro stops outside the city centre. Gosforth actually is a really good place for a drink and an evening. Anyway, so hopefully see a few of you there.
Sold.
Yeah.
We nearly filled the 160 ourselves, but again, that's for another day. And I can only recommend, folks, those are listening, if you're not already, make sure you're subbed to the True Faith channels, follow them on all the socials. I myself am a Patreon member, and it is money well spent for the amount of content that comes out, even down to the instant reactions as well. It's almost like a rite of passage when I'm either traumatized or in elation after a Newcastle result. The instant reaction really helps you to manage those emotions. So I can highly recommend. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and similarly, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, wherever we've managed to infiltrate your podcast feed, drop us a follow, leave us a comment, or of course a 5-star rating if you can. We will be back for more Irish Magnus next week. So until then, all we'll say, lads, is how are the lads? Slán go fóill, and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks again, Alex, Alan, and Tev. Say goodbye, gentlemen.
Slán lad.
Slán go fóill. See you.